Privet, Katila, Von Ningriski desu, and this is the Russo-Ukrainian War weekly update for the week of September 11th through 17. So today we're going to start with the main axis of the Ukrainian offensive in Robotyne, in the Orekha front. So today, actually, to be honest, this week actually has seen a reduction in intensity of actions from both sides. However, that doesn't mean there's been a reduction overall in, or has been a total stoppage of all attacks. There's been attacks repeatedly. For example, the Ukrainians made multiple attempts to attack the village of Verbova right here. From their positions right outside of Verbova. However, all those attacks have been repulsed. There has been no new Ukrainian attacks to try to wedge deeper into Nova Prokofivka. This has basically been the same as it was last week. However, the only change on this front has been that there's been some geolocated footage of the Ukrainians operating right outside the west of Robotyne, like right here a little bit. However, this was them getting shelled, and this was probably just a recon operation to try to see how Russian defenses are in Kopany right here, which are probably along this ridge here. Again, the Ukrainians have probably moved from trying to make a breakthrough to trying to secure their position here. They need to take Verbova, and they need to take Kopany. That way, the front line is stable, and like they have the height, they have their flank secured, and thus they could then position troops here and try again in a few months if they could do that. But right now they're focusing on Verbova and moving to Kopany, but so far those attempts have been repulsed, and there has been no movement of the Ukrainians so far on this axis. The same thing on the Velika Novosolica line, which is the second, kind of in tandem with the Orekha front. Again, last week, as we saw, there was a continuous Ukrainian attacks on Novodonetska and Novomayorska. However, these after continuous attacks, they've all been repulsed. The Ukrainians managed to try to wedge somewhere here, try to get to the flank of Novodonetsk, try to cut off it from Kremenchuk. However, the Russians are still able to hold the supply lines here, and the Ukrainians were defeated and are now back here. So all attempts to try to storm these from different angles have been repulsed this week, and basically, or last week, I should say, and this week there's actually been a reduction in clashes here. Now, in both of these fronts, we don't know if the Ukrainians are either this is they actually did their final pushes. They were just trying to do as much as they could before the fall rainy season came in, or if they're actually preparing for something. I think as we saw, for after they took Urzhina here, for example, the Ukrainians were quiet on this front for 3 weeks before they attacked here. So maybe they're just reconstituting their forces. Maybe the same thing here. Because obviously if they wait here, this is a terrible position. As you can see, it's a bit of a salient here, a little bit. A tiny one, but still, this is not really a good place where you could just funnel your troops and the Russians have both flanks where they could keep bombing you, which is what they were doing. So the Ukrainians need to launch an attack here and here. And maybe that's what they're doing. Maybe they're just gathering the forces to do a big push, try to secure their flanks, take Kopany, Nova Prokofivka, and Verbova, and have a better, kind of flatten the front here a little bit. It's kind of the same thing here. Maybe they're just reconstituting their forces after the attacks here failed. Also, more than likely, according to some geolocated footage, the Russians have been shelling the Ukrainians somewhere here, but there's been no more geolocated footage of Russians shelling Ukrainians here. So most likely than not, the Ukrainians have been pushed out of the houses that they entered in the first day of the assault in Novomayorsk. So both these villages are most likely under full Russian control. So as you can see, there has not been any movement of the Ukrainians basically on the Zaporozhye South Donetsk area. Basically, attacks have been still ongoing, but there's been no progress. One thing to mention about the Donetsk front, again, this is kind of a more quiet front. There's still been shelling in Novomikhailivka and Krasnogorivka. However, Marinka has almost fallen, but there's still just small creeps here, but no movement so far. But the one thing I wanted to mention is that early last week there was a small Ukrainian offensive, or a surprise one, I should say, that reached right on the outskirts of Opena here. And, a lot of Ukrainians were saying this was taken. However, Russians published a geolocated footage of them inside the village. So the Russians still hold on to the village, but the Ukrainians did manage to get up as close as they could to the village. However, the village itself is still under Russian control. Again, the purpose of these attacks was to basically didn't, and again, the Ukrainians also are trying to they haven't pushed here last week, but they've been doing attacks trying to take this Krasnogorovka back. The purpose of these attacks essentially is to that, because if they could push the Russians out of here and out of here, then the northern and western flank of Avdiivka is secured. Right now, they only have like what, but if these things hold, then the Ukrainians are in a bit of a pickle in Avdiivka here. So they're trying to push the Russians back and not have them develop their offensive in Avdiivka here. So again, that's why the Ukrainians have been trying to pressure these points. So they try to pressure here. They haven't taken it yet, but the Ukrainians still have that in mind to try to relieve pressure on Avdiivka. Now, one of the biggest, most interesting parts of the front actually this week has been we're going to return to Bakhmut, which was the center of attention for like the last few months. Well, not since, for all spring and winter, basically. So it's a bit of a nostalgia. Well, I mean, I guess that's not the right way of saying it, but it's kind of like, oh, we're back here again. But anyway, so Bakhmut is the we're back here, and this is kind of a more interesting front for this week. So, according to the Ukrainian sources, they have taken the villages of Andriivka and Klishevka. However, Russian forces have basically, or Russian sources, I should say, have said that they still control the northern part of Klishevka, and that the Ukrainians have not fully controlled it yet. The main Russian defense line now is basically along this rail line right here, as you can see. And the Russians need to control this in order to, this is the main defense line, because then if they break through this, then the Ukrainians will start attacking the next Russian defense line, here in Zaitseva, Opina, and this basically, if they could reach here, they're basically going to start cutting off the Russians in the southern edge of Bakhmut. Which is one of their goals. However, in order to actually encircle Bakhmut and take it back, which is what this offensive operation is about, that's the goal of this, they have to attack and break through in the northern sector. However, they have not been able to do any progress on this area, basically, since the start of the offensive. So the northern part is, they need to take the northern part in order to actually encircle Bakhmut, but in terms of, they've made some progress here. Now, again, the southern portion is still standing. However, the taking of Klishevka and Andriivka, if we believe the Ukrainian sources, are a first step. However, they have cost a lot of blood to take these two villages. It's been 4 months since they've been battling over these villages. And, basically, it's cost the Ukrainians a lot, and we don't know if the Ukrainians have the ability to be able to break through here. Well, we shall see. Maybe they're going to pause here for a bit and then try to restart operations, maybe to again attack, but we'll see. But again, I think, probably the one that's kind of a bit more clear is Andriivka. So as we saw, once they took the southern portion of Klishevka, they managed to get right up here and then here they managed to attack to the southern portion. And basically, they put Andriivka into a pincer and basically forced the Russians to withdraw from Andriivka. And then we got geolocated footage, I think somewhere around here or so, like here, about the Ukrainians basically being able to secure, having say, hey, we took this village, here's us with our flag. However, they can't get too close to the eastern portion of the village because the Russians are literally right here along the rail line. So, again, this is kind of like a Robotina situation where they've technically captured it, but same thing with Klishevka, but the Russians are so close that they keep bombing them, and basically these villages are basically rubble, so it's very hard to actually fortify yourself here, being right in front of enemy lines, and being actually kind of far off. Like, the supply lines here are kind of ass. Like, this is a really bad supply situation to do here. There's not some highway or big road that connects Klishevka to here, for example. So it's kind of hard for them to, this is but this is a good, they could, so it's not as straightforward as they're secure here and all that. They've just been basically to force the Russians out of here, and now the Ukrainians have secured themselves here. So that's kind of what happened. Are they going to let basically be along this rail line be the new front line, or will they keep pushing? Only time will tell. But this week, basically, they've managed to capture Andriivka, and I think the Russians still are in the northern sector of Klishevka. Most Russian sources say that. But the tactical significance of Klishevka has already been secured for the Ukrainians. They took the heights, they took the center and southern part of the village. They don't really need to take the northern part, really. But again, taking these 2 villages, even is more of a morale thing. Again, they had no progress on this front, and now they finally got some progress and actually took 2 villages. So again, a small progress on the Ukrainian part, but it cost a lot of blood, and we'll see if the Ukrainians could keep up the attacks. In terms of other news, there's been very little news. Again, on the Luhansk front, which I kind of combine the Liman and Kupiansk, this entire place right here. And then also Kherson front. These are basically, there's been positional battles. The sides here aren't doing any offensive operations. The points of these fronts are basically to tie down Ukrainian or Russian forces, to deny them from sending their forces from, say here, the Ukrainians have been, again, attacking the islands and such, trying to keep Russian forces in Kherson from, because if this was quiet, they could pool forces here and defend in Zaporozhye, more safe thing in Luhansk. If the Russians weren't attacking or doing positional battles here, the Ukrainians could withdraw more troops and put more pressure on Bakhmut, for example. So, again, these are just to pin down forces, not really to do real offensive operations. That's why we don't really see any movement on the ground here. So yeah, this week has been kind of quiet. Again, battles continue. However, it's not been as intense as last week. In other news, the Ukrainians managed to do an attack in Sevastopol and damaged a few Russian naval ships. However, the Russians have also been doing missile attacks. There's attacks on Odessa and Izmail, on Ukrainian grain infrastructure in the Odessa Oblast. There was an attack on Kryvyi Rog, right here on the airfield here, which damaged a few Ukrainian planes, maybe destroyed them, according to the Russians. There was also an attack in Kharkiv, destroying a factory that was repairing vehicles, tanks specifically. And so the Russians are still bombing, doing some casual missile attacks. Also, Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin have met and they basically discussed economic cooperation, but also military support. From most, it was not as open, but most sources have said basically that the North Korea plans on helping Russia provide them with shells, long range, like Smerch and Uragan kind of types of missiles, like long range missiles instead of regular shells. The regular shells shoot about 20 kilometers, but Ukrainians have been able to get from all the former Warsaw Pact countries and such who could shoot 40 kilometers with the missile range. So this helps Russia in terms of the shells. And also deepens cooperation with North Korea. So there was that meeting with Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un. What else? Also, Zelensky is going to visit Washington and speak to the Senate to get a bigger aid package. They're trying to pass a $20 billion aid package to support Ukraine for next year. So Zelensky needs that aid, or else it'll be kind of hard for him to continue the war. So that's been the situation this week on the ground. I hope you enjoyed. If you like this video, give it a like and share it around. And if you really liked it, subscribe to my channel to see more videos like this. So aim high, wander on, from America with Russian love.